Welcome to Nasdaq Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, global markets reporter at Nasdaq. Joining us for this segment, we have Sami, home finance expert with Forbes Home, a destination for time-saving project advice, how-tos, and product comparisons to discuss why moving prices increased by 15% more this year. Sami, it's great to have you with us. Welcome to Trade Talks.
Thank you so much, Jill.
All right, moving, everyone's favorite subject. I'm sure you hear horror stories all the time. Let's start with moving stats between 2019 and 2020 as a response to COVID-19 and how the trends differ from 20 to 2021.
Sure, yeah. After COVID-19 hit, manufacturing slowed and gas prices increased, even packing supplies, which caused moving costs to increase. So from 2019 to 2020, we did see a huge increase in both temporary and permanent moves. And we're still seeing that in 2021, though temporary moves are less common now. But as another result of COVID-19, people in key cities like New York and Los Angeles decided to move out either because of course, the pandemic, wildfires, even on the West Coast, jobs going remote, plus peak seasonality is May through September. So last year in particular, a lot of people were hit with much higher fees, of course, because of that seasonality, but paired with the labor shortages and price surging. So it's been a mess.
It really has been. So why is moving so expensive right now? Is it exclusive to what we saw with COVID and labor shortage, or is it just an expensive proposition in general?
Yeah, there's a lot of factors. Of course, COVID is a major player in this, but what's really interesting is some labor shortages were already happening before COVID-19 hit. So the U.S. Department of Transportation had an ELD rule come out that enforced companies to limit a driver's time on the road, which started causing some delays. So that mixed with COVID definitely made it a lot more pricey to move last year and this year.
Just how expensive is moving on a regional basis?
Majority of the US is seeing an increase in moving prices when it comes to long distance moving costs, but the West, particularly California, is seeing the most moves out. So we are seeing a lot of people wanting to travel from west to east, which means there are less available moving trucks to help facilitate moves. And it's even affecting states like Washington and Oregon.
So we spoke about the labor shortage and how it's impacting the cost of moving. Is it impacting in any other ways? Is it taking longer to move or people having to delay moves because of it?
Oh, yes. Almost everywhere seeing moving delays, of course, still from west to east, seeing the majority of that. Moves coming out of California, Oregon, and Washington. We're also seeing a change in migration patterns. So people from those states are heading to states like Texas, Florida, and Arizona, all lower cost of living areas, while people from New York are actually migrating south along the I-95 corridor to states like Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and South Carolina, as well as, people are considering how much they're bringing with them on their moves. So that has changed people's plans as well. A lot of the people we spoke with are now deciding to sell their things at last minute because of the increase in costs.
So we discussed the states that saw the biggest inflows and outflows. Are you seeing anything when it comes to the cities which saw the biggest inflows and outflows? And do you expect those trends to continue?
Yes, Texas, Florida, and South Carolina topped the list of states most moved into in 2021 based on net gain of residents. However, what's really interesting is when you compare the total population against the percent change of moves in, Delaware actually had the biggest increase in new residents with a 0.23% change, according to USPS. Certain cities like Katy, Texas saw a whopping 16% increase in incoming residents. Meanwhile, cities like LA and New York are definitely one of the biggest exodus cities, and California, New York, and Illinois topped the states most moved out of in 2021 based on net loss of residents.
Right. Well, I mean, if you can work somewhere remotely and be even just as productive, if not more, but then have a much more reasonable cost of living, you can understand why. I mean, tax treatment is better than a lot of states on the coast. And then also the weather, especially if you're going from New York to Florida, you can understand why it's been attractive. What do people do wrong when they book a moving company? And how can one save money on a long distance move?
Yes. A lot of people, a lot of times when they're looking at moving companies, do not properly check that company's credentials. So it's important to check the DOT Safer website for license information. Take a look at the years in business versus the complaint ratio to get a better sense of how that company is doing. Also be aware of what the average price of your move will be. Gather a handful of estimates and compare the pricing. Ultimately, if you have two estimates that are at 10,000 and one at 5,000, it might seem like a better deal, but you could end up paying more in hidden fees later on. That could be a moving scam. So if the quote sounds too good to be true, it is. Some ways that you can save money to move, definitely self-pack. Book a date in advance. We recommend at least 2 to 3 months in advance, and getting rid of any unwanted stuff. So any way to save on space is a great way to save on money. And finally, moving during the last week of the month is definitely a no-go. There's a higher demand to move during those times.
One thing about moving, the one silver lining, it is very cathartic, cleaning out everything that you haven't touched in at least 6 months to a year. Sami, amazing advice. Thanks so much for joining us on Trade Talks. I'm Jill Malandrino, Global Markets Reporter at Nasdaq.
Thank you so much.